Hey, everybody, welcome to today's episode of The Suspense is Killing Me. I have today Mr. Joe Maddrey.
That's me. Well, that's not me. That's Wes Craven.
So I say, because we had someone ask you at the book signing the other day, oh, this is a really cool cover. Who is that? And you're like, it's the guy. It's the guy the book's about. If you guys have never met Mr. Joe Maddrey, he is the author of The Soul of Wes Craven, amongst many, many, many other books. How many is it now? Like,
this is 13, I think.
wow.
It was fun, I have to say, actually, with a title like that. It was fun, like, copywriting The Soul of Wes Craven. I felt very sort of Daniel Webster. The Faustian bargain that I had with Wes.
You now own it. You now own Wes Craven's soul.
I've copyrighted it.
So, Joe, you did something pretty amazing with this book, and we'll get into it, obviously. But before we do that, I want people to understand how you got into this. Like, your career as a writer has kind of geared you up for this type of project. I think it's a good qualifier because someone taking on a project of this scope and depth because of the way you did it, it's pretty remarkable. It's actually very remarkable. And it wasn't lost on me that it would take a certain kind of person to be able to pull this off properly. And you're the perfect fit for it.
A very obsessive person. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, I mean, I didn't plan it this way, but I sort of, as I've been talking about it in the last couple of months, was realizing, well, actually the last chapter of my first book was about Wes. So I really have kind of come full circle. And when I started working in earnest on the book, I didn't know it was going to be, 460 pages and quite as in depth. That's just the obsessive nature of me. That the deeper I got in, the more people I talked to, the more things I learned. It became an obsession. So that's kind of what the book is.
Well, I think there's magic in that, because if I was going to pick up a book titled The Soul of Wes Craven, and I was a real Wes Craven fan, I'd be pretty peeved if
Give me a short book. Yeah.
Yeah. If we just skim the surface, I'd be like, come on, man, this guy's body of work, obviously his reputation in the industry, all these things kind of, when you consider them, this is what you're looking for, man. You want that hefty, full throated, kind of like end to end exploration of him and his work
of the inner life. Yeah, it's the deep dive into the inner life, which I don't think, obviously there's other books on Wes, and I don't think they, for the most part, they kind of stick to the films and have a few kind of biographical anecdotes, and this was like, I want to live in Wes's head for a few years, and and talking to so many different people who knew him at different times over his life. That was the only way I could do that, because by the time I was writing the book, Wes wasn't around anymore, and I couldn't go to the source. So I had to kind of, I had to go to all those sort of context clues, and read all the things that he'd written that most people had not found in that art part of his legacy, and just just dive in.
And you knew Wes to a certain.
Well, I met him. I mean, what happened there was that I was going to interview him for a documentary that I made about horror films, history of horror films, and he wasn't able to do the interview because he was off making a movie for a period of time. And
man.
He was doing his job, and I ended up kind of delivering the documentary without him in it right before he finished up the film. Now, had I known that the timing was going to work out the way it was, I would have just held on to the master tapes a little longer and done the interview. But he popped up and he said, "Hey, I'm ready to do that interview now." And I was like, "Well, shit, that moment has passed." And but I still want to do the interview. And I kind of, I'd written obviously a chapter about him in a previous book, and I was at that point, really more interested in kind of doing biographies than anything else. I was working on a biography of someone else at the time. And so I said, I think I might want to do a biography about you one day. So can we have the meeting and talk about that? And he said, yeah, come meet me for lunch. So, I mean, I went and had this, 2-hour lunch with Wes. where, because it wasn't for a specific project, where we were just like guys talking, and he started off and he's just like, so what you're interested in me and my horror films, and why are we here? And he kind of wanted to put it on a very personal level right off the bat, which makes sense if somebody's threatening to write a book about you, right? It's like, where are you coming from? Who the hell are you? Why do you want to do this? How deep do you want to go?
Right.
But we ended up talking a lot about kind of our sort of formative experiences. So it's like childhood and kind of all the way up through college years. And that was really where we focused. We were talking about his life before he even got interested really in film.
Right.
Because he wasn't a guy who grew up watching movies. He was part of that, sort of that movie generation, the movie geek generation, but that just wasn't his experience. He was much more of a literary guy. And I had some of that. I was a movie geek for sure, but I was, I was an English major, and I was a book nerd and an introvert as a kid. And so it's some of the things that he was particularly interested in were things that I was interested in. He'd grown up in a religious house. I was a preacher's kid. So there were just certain things that we kind of connected on. And yeah, I mean, nothing really happened with that for a while. I sat on that interview and didn't come back to it for a few years. By the time I really came back to it and was kind of free and clear to write a book, Wes was gone. So I started researching the book in earnest by just listening to him talk about what he'd done in high school and college, and the people he'd been around, and what was important to him, and what his experiences were at that time in his life. And then just going, I wonder if I can find the stuff that he was writing, that he published in his high school newspaper or in his college literary magazine. And then I wonder if I can find these people who were published alongside him, who were his peers. Would they remember him? And that just became what I did in the early days of COVID, was like tracking people down, stalking people on the internet, and finding them and cold calling them and saying, you don't know me, but I think you went to elementary school with Wes Craven, right? You want to talk about that? And I thought, I didn't know how that was going to go, but everybody, maybe because it was COVID, everybody was, happy to talk. And,
yeah.
So yeah, it's
probably some of that. Yeah.
And then once I'd done such a deep dive on the early years, it's like, man, now I've got to really do a deeper dive on the later stuff. I can't just kind of regurgitate what's been in other books and what's already known about the later stuff. So it just became, it became a heavy lift. And also, once you're talking to the people who were in his life, the people who loved him and the people that he loved, you're kind of now on the radar, and you have a certain responsibility to do it well to all these people and to Wes's legacy. So
yeah, that is a tremendous responsibility. I mean, not only that's got to feel pretty heavy as the interviews stack up and the relationships are formed and all that. You got a pretty substantial responsibility to get that right when you get working on something like that. For those that aren't aware, like, you're pretty heavy on the nonfiction side, even though you write both fiction and nonfiction. A lot of your work is in the nonfiction side. And it takes a certain amount of, or a certain method and approach to doing something like this, which is methodical and process driven, and also very intuitive and natural because of the interview, the nature of how you're deriving a lot of your stuff. But I mean, that's not a muscle that a lot of people get to exercise, and it's not a muscle that some people have ever even used. I mean, you got your start you've got a background in television. You've been writing for television for years, right? So you tell us a little bit about, like, what qualified you, I guess, to have this idea and then actually chase after it with confidence? Because I think some people would be terrified to be like, I'm just going to write an autobiography on Wes Craven.
I don't know that anything qualified me, or that I planned any of this. I mean, this was just like, I was an English major in college. I loved doing research. I loved kind of trying to find the story in the research. And yeah, I graduated college with an English degree, and it's like, what do you do for a living? How do people make money? I don't know how people make money. And so, I mean, I fell into kind of both these like dual tracks of, that I'd written in college. I'd written what became my first book. and as a like an independent study paper, and and then I graduated and sent it off to a couple of publishers, just because I was flailing. I was just trying to figure out, like, how do I make money? What am I going to do? And around that same time, I like I said, I was always kind of a movie geek, and I just happened to like meet this dude in a dentist's office. Like, we're sitting in the waiting room in a dentist's office, just like talking about movies. He had just done a movie with Bill Duke. He's like, who Bill Duke is? Oh yeah, like the guy from Predator, the Schwarzenegger movie. And like we just like started geeking out over movies. And I just graduated. He's like, what do you do? I said, I don't do anything. But what do you want to do? And
I dream.
yeah. I'm gonna write the great American novel, is the plan. And he said, yeah, you should come out to, there's this production company that does Discovery Channel shows, and you should come out and meet some people, and come out and, like, they'd hire you as a PA, and you kind of get the lay of the land and figure out how TV shows get made. And so, like, the first thing that I did, this is right out of college, was this company was doing a series of shows about different Navy SEAL missions.
Oh.
And, it was like a docudrama reenactment kind of thing. And
Gotcha.
it's like, so like my first job is like, all this stuff was shot at night, in, January in the freezing cold, with like actors getting in the water, and
in the Pacific.
Yeah. Well, we were actually like in this kind of like scummy lake, was actually where a lot of the water, but we were in like the Virginia Beach area, so we're using like real Navy SEALs,
okay.
in the recrees and everything. And yeah, it was just, I mean, I had definitely had a couple of moments of like, I went to college for this. Like, what am I'm just like kind of like, shepherding actors around. It was such a weird, like, what am I doing? But, but I like got in with that company, and I met all the people at that company, and kind of ingratiated myself. And then at a certain point said, I want to come in the office and have a little more comfortable job. And, I wanted to do the research. So I started researching the FBI Files, which was like a primetime Discovery Channel show that they did. I started as a researcher on that, and, just worked up at that company up to a episode producer, and moved out to LA, kept doing different things, sort of shifted a little bit over into doing more writing than producing, just because I enjoyed it more. None of this was really planned. I tell my daughter, it's like, I didn't have a plan, but it would have, it kind of worked out. I like what I do. So,
well, I mean, so I mean, a PA, correct me if I'm wrong, that's a production assistant.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, you were doing a lot of like the assistant type work,
Yeah. Everything like, trickles down to you, whatever somebody doesn't want to do, whatever the dirty work is, you're going to.
So how did you migrate from that into writing? I mean, was there like a position open? Did you have to work with the existing writers to, hey, this is what I went to school for. Here's some samples. Yeah. This is how I get in.
Everything at this company that I was at was pretty much in-house. All the jobs were in-house except for the writers. They hired freelance writers. Everything else was kind of self-contained. So, I mean, I would do the research and create these big research binders for individual stories that then got sent out to the writer. And just from my interactions with the writers, it was like, that's what I want to do. But I actually ended up, because the writers were not in-house, and I was an employee of this company, I actually ended up being a producer on shows before I was a writer. And then it's like you're on the kind of the other side, where the writers turn in the script, and you're sort of working with them to fine tune it. And then you're, sitting with the editors in post. You're there for the shoot. If they're doing recrees, you're on set, just trying to track the story, and give the editor notes in post, and all of, just like the whole process. The producer, you're sort of involved in the whole process. So in a weird way, writing was actually maybe kind of a step back from that, but that was just the piece of the puzzle that I really liked doing.
That's wild. So, I mean, on your website for the book, which I'll throw a link up here real quick, guys, if you want to go check out the book, here's the link. And there's a tab at the top of the page that says about the book. And when you open that up, there's a little bio on you lower in the paragraph, or sorry, in the run on the page. And it's like, written or produced over 100 hours of documentary television. And my mind went, hold on a second, 100 produced hours, like finished
Yeah.
hours. That's a ton of work. That's a lot
Well,
of television.
it's been, 20 plus years. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
It's just one sentence in your bio. And I'm like, what? It's like I have an
yeah.
appreciation for how much that's a finished production hour. That's a lot of work. And you've got that 100 hours wrapped up in, like Discovery Channel's A
Mhm.
Haunting, the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, and Oxygen Snapped, which, by the way, I told my wife about that and she was like, dude, yeah, like that was great. And then TV One's Payback. So
Yep.
you've got quite a bit of, quite of an expansive, you weren't just working for one network, you were working for an actual production company that was shopping to different networks. Is that the same production
Well,
company? Or?
it's different production companies. I mean,
Okay.
usually, yeah, I haven't ever worked directly for a network. It's always been for just different production companies that then contract with the network. And I, in the past, I have been an employee of production companies, although now I mostly work as a freelancer, as a
Right.
writer. Um, yeah.
Awesome.
Uh,
So this obviously gives you credit when you're talking to someone like Wes Craven, not just because you have done things, but
maybe.
you understand the world he was working in. I guess, when it comes to
Yeah.
producing television, he was doing, mostly film. But, I think you have a unique perspective that a lot of writers wouldn't necessarily walk in the door with. If you're going to do an autobiography on someone who spent, a significant amount of their professional life producing film,
Yeah.
um, it is helpful to have your perspective. I think that is really big for us because as fellow writers, like you and I were talking about beforehand, like I don't have any experience in that world. So for me to capture someone like Wes Craven's career and their personal life and understanding how one impacts the other, I've never experienced working in that industry. I would not have a real appreciation for what that's like, but you do.
Yeah, well, I think I mean, it's a lot of it's background knowledge, just what goes in, what the different jobs are in a production. And yeah, I mean, in a way, I think probably I used that knowledge more in the adapting Stephen King books that I did, just
Right.
because those were so much about the development or kind of redevelopment of an idea. There's a book that exists, and a lot of people who write about an adaptation will sort of go, all right, well, here's the book. I'm going to read the book, and then I'm going to watch the movie, and we're just going to kind of assume that you know the decision that kind of like simple decisions were made getting from point A to point B. And of course it's not that. It's like, it's because film and television is a collaborative medium, and there's people who weigh in whose ideas and responses to things are really um disproportionate. They kind of outweigh what the writer says, even though they're maybe not focused on the story, the integrity of the story, or what, there's just so many considerations that go into translating something, and then all of the kind of the production hardships that can come up and the budgetary hardships. And you got 43 producers on this thing, and they all have a different idea what it should be. And then we focus tested it, and the man off the street at the casinos in Vegas didn't like this version. It didn't like your ending, so we got to go reshoot it and change. Just the number of things that can go into adapting something. It's, I really wanted to write books that were kind of about that process. And I've never really been on the true kind of Hollywood studio side of doing all of that, but I've certainly interviewed a lot of people who were on that side of things. And I think with the West books, some of that was actually maybe more kind of background knowledge, because the thing that was interesting to me about Wes was the fact that he was such a literary minded storyteller, and that he did
Mm,
think so much in terms of theme, and that he didn't grow up on movies, and so his storytelling instincts were not based on watching movies, trying to think like a filmmaker, being a filmmaker, experimenting with filmmaking. His instincts as a storyteller, and his concerns as a storyteller. All of that was kind of baked in before he was even watching movies, let alone making them. And so I really wanted to, in looking at what is the inner life of Wes Craven, what is the soul of Wes Craven, I mean, it was really much more for me about looking at him as a storyteller who might have just as easily been working in the print medium. So there's not a lot of kind of anecdotes about like that crazy thing that happened during the shoot of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Isn't this a funny story? Or it's, the meeting with Johnny Depp. I mean, the anecdotal kind of stuff just really was. I was like, that's what we have bonus features on DVDs for.
Yeah.
And that's not really where the book goes. The book was kind of about tracking, what was important to Wes and what was going on in his mind as he evolved, basically as a person, and was expressing himself and his beliefs and his view of the world through the stories that he told, and how that changed because he had a full life.
Yeah.
And he really put himself out there as both a human being and a storyteller. He took a lot of chances and a lot of risks. And, he led an interesting life. And some of the most interesting things in his life and in the book were things that I don't think I know that even some of the people who knew him really well in his life, including his wife and children, there were things that I kind of dug up and put in the book. They were like, I didn't know that.
Wow. That's pretty wild. I mean, because, their proximity to some of these stories was probably limited just because they weren't interacting with some of those people you were, you know?
Yeah.
So that's really cool. It's kind of a gift that you were able to bring that to the family. I mean, when I first was thinking about talking about the story, I was like, wow, one of the things I'm automatically always wondering when I see someone do an autobiography is how close did they get to the family in the process of this, only because I'm such a big Frank Zappa fan.
Yeah.
and even that family like dynamic around his work has been wild since he passed. It just kind of opens up this door of like, even people that worked with Frank couldn't tell the story the same way some of his family could. And then some of his family members don't know a lot of the stories from when, he was on the road or doing whatever.
Yeah.
But there's just, when you can bring the two together, it's pretty magical. And I think this is kind of one of the coolest things you've done with this book is you brought all of it together. It's not just one side. Like you said, it wasn't just a television and it wasn't just the family and friends. It's kind of everything. It's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think my favorite chapter is probably the college chapter, like the Wheaton College chapter, because I interviewed probably about 20 people who were at Wheaton at the same time as Wes. And the funny thing about it was like, they were all brilliant, just like they're just incredibly smart people who got a really good education there, but also who, it was Wheaton College. It was an evangelical college. A lot of them were coming out of, religious backgrounds. They were all asking big questions. They were all trying in a very serious, very intense way to figure out who they were and what they believed. And, just this, I always sort of think in terms of like, this is a group of people who are all kind of like forged in the same fire.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And they just, and they all had so much kind of respect for each other's journey, even like the 50 years later, if like, because most of them did not stay in touch with Wes after college, but they could speak about him so kind of intimately and how important he was because they shared like a bond of that time in their life, that experience and that place, which was, which was a very intense, time and place to be, in the early 60s in an evangelical, the times were changing and in some ways the school wasn't changing with them, but it was also a very academically rigorous school. And so, it was just, I was just kind of amazed to get that story from all those people and go, it makes sense to me that now that Wes was as intense as he was and that he was exploring some of the things that he was exploring because he came out of that environment. And, and nobody had ever really told that story before. None of those people had ever been approached and be like, you knew Wes Craven, right? I mean, none of that had ever been, but that it just wasn't really part of his narrative, except every now and then somebody would kind of go, Wes, you went to Billy Graham's college? Like what the, like, what the
Well,
hell?
you're the Sultan of Slash.
Yeah, it was just, but it was just kind of a joke in a way. It was like a cute anecdote, but nobody really did the dive and went, how did that change you? How did that shape you? Because I really think it did. I mean, I think the
Oh,
experiences he had
sure.
there just made him who he was, and rebelling against it in some ways, is what made
Yeah.
him. And that's where we got Wes Craven. You don't get to who he was and the him being a successful at telling the type of stories that he told without him having been forged in that fire.
Mm.
And same thing with with the sort of mysterious years between Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes, when he was working in adult cinema in New York in the 70s, and some of the stuff that was going on there, which a lot of that story just hadn't been told. Wes wasn't volunteering it.
I didn't know he was in
So
that.
yeah, that's what he was doing. That's the work that he could get, and that was really his training grounds as a film. I mean, that was kind of his film school.
Mm.
He didn't go to film school. He was learning by trial and error, and he was getting paid to make. I mean, it was adult films were a different animal in the 70s than what we anybody would think of
Sure.
now. So it was like write a story. You have a script. You can work out some really heavy literary themes in a film that also has
A lot of
hardcore
that.
action in it. Yeah, I mean, so it's a strange thing.
But I mean, again, like you said, you put that together. Like you have to understand the context that created this human.
Yeah,
He's got this
yeah.
such an interesting past. So I don't know if anyone who is listening to this thought they were going to hear about Wes Craven's adult film experiences, not as an actor.
Not as an actor, fully clothed. Yep, yep,
Yeah, he was a professional on the scene.
yep.
As we said earlier, he was the adult in the room.
Right, right.
His work, I had no idea before I talked to you about this project that he had gone to, that he had such a strong kind of like evangelical Christian upbringing.
Yeah, yeah.
When you told me we were at that book signing at Turn the Page, you told me he had gone to Billy Graham's college. I was like, what? Like,
Yeah.
here's the Wes Craven I grew up with. Like, here's terrified 10-year-old, me watching any, maybe Dream Warriors or something,
Yeah.
and just being like, wow, like what mind came up with this?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have put all those things
too.
together.
Me too. I mean, I remember going to the Virginia Film Festival in 1995, and Wes was there doing a sneak preview of Vampire in Brooklyn.
Hmm.
And and I was the little nerdy teenager who came up with my VHS copy of A Nightmare on Elm Street to get it autographed, and was just like in awe of this guy. Like, this guy created Freddy Krueger. I mean, what's the deal there? And yeah, I mean, it was so interesting kind of studying his childhood, because the way that he talked about it really was almost like he was sort of traumatized because he grew up in a very, very, very strict Baptist fundamentalist church. And so it's like you're growing up with like, everything that's in the Bible is literally true. Nothing's a metaphor. There's no figurative anything here. This is the literal truth. And he was a smart enough kid, by the time he got to a certain age, to be like, really? And started questioning it, and also just didn't that he was in, you talk about kind of like the revival days at church, where everybody seems to be having these big experiences. They're having emotional experiences. They're going up and in front of the congregation and saying that they've been sort of touched by God. And Wes was like, I'm not having these experiences. And he felt just outright rejected by God. There's everybody around me is having this experience that I'm not having. I'm being rejected for some reason. And it became a big part of like this insecurity.
Wow.
And then what do you do with that as you get older? Because he really went through, and then he had this experience in college, and he didn't talk about this much either. So there were definitely people close to him in his life who didn't know about this, but he had an experience in college where he got, some kind of just like common, viral infection. And it it turned into like a paralysis that was
Wow.
never really diagnosed, where he woke up one night, to get out of bed, and he couldn't walk because his feet were numb,
Hmm.
and the numbness just kept spreading up, 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 up. So he's put in the infirmary, the local hospital, and by morning he's paralyzed from the chest down.
Is that like Guillain-Barré or something? Sounds
Well,
like that.
that's one of the theories. Yeah, that's one of the theories that might have been what it was.
Yeah.
But he, was sent home because he said the doctors that morning were like, this could resolve itself quickly or over a long period of time, or the paralysis could keep going and you're dead.
Dude.
And it stopped, within 12, 24 hours, whatever it was, but he remained paralyzed, from I believe chest. That could have been chest. I think it must have been waist down because he would have had been able to digest his food. But
Mm.
he was paralyzed for months. Like
That's
went
crazy.
he was sent home, and mom had to take care of him. Like he was bedridden for months, and he thought that might very well be the rest of his life.
Mm.
And he had actually aspired before that to be in the Navy, to be a pilot in the Navy, and
Wow.
that dream went away just like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And so just the number of kind of intense things that he went through, and his reaction to that experience was, I am damned. God put his finger on me, and you were a bad person, and I mean, so he was carrying this massive
Wow.
amount of guilt from all of that, and he processed all of that through his writing, through the poetry he was writing in college, the short stories he was writing, through his study of literature. He went and got a master's degree at Johns Hopkins in the writing seminars there, which has turned out a lot of very famous writers, including one who I reached out, who was in Wes's class, who was a pretty well-known novelist. And he was like, "Are you telling me Wes Craven was in my writing seminar?"
Yeah, like, I'm telling you that.
Because he wasn't Wes Craven at the time,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
he wasn't writing horror. He wasn't that guy. And yeah, it's like, he's like, I don't remember it.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating life story. And then when you're studying films that you care about, stories that you care about, and kind of understanding the context of the person who made all this, it becomes this for me, just this one big sort of meta narrative that I just love, because now I can't watch the films without seeing them in different ways, contextualizing them in different ways, and getting something different out of them. And that deepens my experience of watching these films that I've seen a dozen times, and that I love, and that I can see in a new way because of different. So like the goal really is that, I hope this book does that for other people. They love this guy's films, and then you go and read the book, and you watch them in a different way, and it deepens your experience of something that you already love.
Wow. Man, that's crazy. I'm you've got me all motivated now to read this, in its entirety, and then go back to all the movies I saw growing up.
Goal. Yeah.
That's what we got to do. And the other thing is, like, I had a period of time where I was just removed from culture, by my job, which took me out to sea and far away from all the things. And the one thing we did have was these 8mm videos, so whatever they had stocked in the Navy film repository that the Navy and Coast Guard share, which is like super controlled, of course. We could watch things like this, but we didn't have anything relatively new. So it was kind of a fun reason to go, dude, let's watch like some of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies or whatever. And although I was rarely ever able to take advantage of that time because I didn't have as much downtime underway as some of my counterparts did, to be able to like experience all that kind of made life a little bit more real, because it feels so surreal out there. You feel so separated from everything. That it's like a tie right back to where you were when you were younger, or your real life or whatever. I wish I had had this type of perspective Because just to think about how much richer that would have been, even though it was already a rich thing, to be able to see it through a better lens. Because I'm sitting there watching those movies, going, I can't believe we used to get away with like seeing this as a young person. You know, like I just think about my kids now; they'd be like, "Oh God, I don't want to see that." Like, I showed my daughter Dream Warriors, and she was like, "Hey, why don't we just turn this off and come back to it another time?" And I'm like, "What's wrong?" She's like, "It's 2 o'clock in the morning." I'm like, oh, it's a little too scary for you late at night, is it? You know, it's like the little things like that. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, just the weirdness of 80s horror.
Love
I
it.
imagine it's just like, I don't have a frame of reference for this. Maybe I don't, but I love what you just said about the kind of like the separation from culture, because that was something that was something that Wes would always talk about, that the church, you know, the strictness of the church kind of separated him from the culture. And so, you know, because it's like he was taught all that matters is what you're being taught in the church, and everything else is a sin. Everything else is, you know, you need to avoid all that. So the fact that he then went and became Wes Craven, you know, famous for like creating some of pop culture's, you know, biggest horror movies, you know, creator of Freddy Krueger. And I just, you know, he was able to take something that he was, you know, kind of sheltered from, and turn it into something that has become, it's like part of our, you know, childhoods. I mean, it's like part of the culture that we grew up in, that was kind of taken for granted because it was everywhere. I mean, you didn't grow up being our age, and like Freddy was everywhere.
Everywhere. You know? I mean, I was Freddy for it was like Halloween one year. I almost say Christmas. It was I probably was Freddy for Christmas that year.
That's even cooler. Yeah.
I want to say
hardcore, man.
Yeah.
Coming down the chimney and
Hey. It's like, I remember just being he was my favorite. You know, Jason was probably number 2. I think those were my top 2 at that point in life, but Freddy Krueger, hands down, was the best.
He was more fun. Yeah,
he was a lot more fun. And I don't know, I was probably 1988. I was 10 years old.
Yeah,
and it was just this amazing time from like 86 to 92 ish. You know, imagination just on hyperdrive. And all the cool stuff we had available to us at that point. My mom we didn't have a whole, like we weren't, you wouldn't know growing up in that house that we were as strapped for cash as we were. My parents did a really good job of making sure that like we didn't feel that. But my mom insisted on having HBO. Insisted. Yeah. It was like the one luxury we were going to have. And so I was able to watch all these things. And I went through this whole phase where I was like, let's rent, you know, Faces of Death. And I want to watch all the horror movies like all weekend. And my mom would be like, great, get them all. And we'd go to like Blockbuster and wipe the shelf clean, buy all the popcorn and just veg out at the house with Domino's Pizza. Cause that's what you did in the late 80s. And that was like my childhood was Freddy Krueger, Domino's Pizza.
I could just wax nostalgic about video stores for days.
Yeah, man.
Just like that experience, you know, or even HBO at a certain time. You know, like it would be hard to explain to anybody. I think now just
how important that
cool,
was.
Well, like how cool, like Tales from the Crypt.
Oh, I loved
it. You know, like how cool it was that you would only see it on HBO. It was different from anything else that was out there, and at a certain age you're just like, wow, I can't believe this exists, and that I'm able that I have access to it. And
it's pretty awesome. That was entirely my experience at that age. So when I see Wes Craven, I realize I didn't know anything about the guy who had created all this tremendously impactful culture for me at such a like pivotal age. Those developmental years are just, you know, they're magic. He's part of that magic. And I think, you know, like I was reading some of the quotes on your website and some of the blurbs on the back of the book. And it's just like, I feel like I'm sitting down at the table talking to a bunch of people that were right around the same time experiencing the same things. Like Grady Hendrix says, you know, finally the Bible is written for the cult of Wes Craven. You know, it's really cool. It's like, am I part of the cult? I mean, maybe I am. Like, I don't know. It's like I had this. He was so tremendously impactful to me, and I didn't even realize it until I stepped back as an adult and thought, wow, how big a role did Wes Craven play in my childhood? It's pretty big. I mean,
Yeah.
you had names like Wes Craven, you had Jim Henson, working a little bit more on the
Yeah.
more family oriented, like kind of
Yeah.
fantasy
I
focused
know.
stuff.
Labyrinth was that was a milestone thing
Oh
for
my
me. I mean,
gosh.
I still am crushing on Jennifer Connelly from, Labyrinth. That first viewing of Labyrinth, like,
Yeah. Well, every time you and I hang out, I can't get you to stop singing that, the soundtrack of Labyrinth.
you don't want to hear me sing, man. Don't
I'm
do
completely
that.
making that up for the record. So, but I thought that something else that was on your website that I found fascinating was like I didn't even know how Wes passed.
Yeah.
I didn't know he had brain cancer. Like I just didn't know. It was like I was gone.
Well, I don't think anybody knew until he was gone, except for very, very close family. And there's a funny thing that's happened where, um, especially like the horror film, or the genre filmmakers, at least of that generation, when they pass, how we as fans feel that loss on a kind of a personal level, and go, wait, what is this? I didn't really know this person. But yeah, it is that they, I wrote a biography years ago with Lance Henriksen, wrote his biography, co-wrote his biography, and so I used to go around to the conventions with him, and it's always kind of variations on the same thing of people going up, going, man, I saw Aliens when I was 8 years old, and it changed my life, and there was one day where Lance, you know, like he would always kind of play along, oh yeah, thank you, thanks, man, and but he kind of turned to me one day and he was just like, I kind of don't understand this, like why this is so important
To
to
other
people.
people.
Yeah.
Ah,
And I, having written the biography and having talked to him about his experience making Aliens, I said, well, Aliens is it's like a, it's a very specific time and place in his life. It's like
yeah.
a piece of his memory. I was there. I made this movie. It's whatever, 6 weeks, and then I went off and did something else, and I was another person. And so it's very contained. And what he remembers is like the experience of onset and who was there and how they were interacting and what his ideas were for the role. But it's like there's a beginning and there's an end. And I said, somebody like me who sees, Aliens with my dad,
Oh,
at a certain age, and it's like this bonding experience, and it's like I've seen it God knows how many times since then. I just watched
yeah.
it with my daughter, um,
I love that
who
movie.
loved it, and yeah, it's just like, but I've lived with it in a way that actually I've lived with it more than Lance has, even though he's gone around been
Mhm.
signing, autographing Aliens memorabilia for however many years. It's like, I've watched it and rewatched it and re-experienced it, and it's like part of the fabric of my life
Mm.
in a way. And so, when I said, people are coming up, and it's like you're family, dude. Like they're
I,
coming up and they're just like Bishop's family. And
yeah.
I was like, that's what it is. Like,
And I'm
that's what it is.
I'm
It's not
that
an insincere thing. People are not coming up
right.
like blowing smoke. Like they really feel this way,
I mean, and when you see his face, I mean, because we grew up with that stuff,
Yeah.
it's like you're meeting a character of this story that was so influential on us.
Yeah.
And
It's, it's back to the video store. I would always go into the video store,
he's like, it's me, man.
like it's like, oh, Lance Henriksen's there. Yeah, we're gonna rent that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because he's always fun to watch.
And so you wrote his biography,
Yeah.
right? So Not
Yep.
Bad for a Human is the
Hmm.
title.
Yep.
Okay. When you see me over here doing things, I'm looking up some of the things you're
You're
mentioning.
you're Googling me. All right. Yeah.
Well, it's on the Soul of Wes Craven's bio as well.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And I didn't know you had written a biography of T.S. Eliot.
Two, actually. Yeah, that's a yeah, I don't know. That's the English major. That's the really nerdy part of me.
Super nerd.
Yeah, but that was a big that was one of the big connections with Wes, because Wes studied Eliot,
Mm.
at when he was at Hopkins, when he was getting his master's degree, and the guy that it was basically Wes's mentor at Hopkins was somebody who actually knew T.S. Eliot personally.
Wow.
And had written, criticism about him. And so, so yeah, Wes Craven was, I mean, it's like this 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon thing. He was like 1 degree removed from T.S. Eliot, which is not something. And actually, there's another one that's kind of even better than that. I didn't learn this until sort of late in the research process. He had this experience where he was where he allowed, when he was the editor of the literary magazine at Wheaton College, and he allowed some stuff to be published that kind of ruffled some feathers. The powers that be didn't think it was appropriate for the hallowed halls of Wheaton College.
Right.
And so he actually, as his phrase was denounced from the pulpit. He was denounced from the pulpit for allowing that to happen by the president of the college. Well, there was something I found just looking at the Wheaton College newspapers from around that time period, from a few months later, where they actually had W.H. Auden come to Wheaton College to give a talk. And W.H. Auden actually addressed this controversy and defended Wes Craven, his editorship of the literary magazine. So it's just like, I mean, things you don't connect Wes Craven to, as the father of Freddy Krueger, you don't kind of put him in that context. But he was a very, hyper intelligent literary guy, and he baked a lot of that stuff into exploitation films that totally work as exploitation films. But if you, if you're a little more attentive to what's going on in the films, there's a lot there.
Well, I mean, it's hard to miss some of the literary influence of just think about how gothic the whole Freddy birth scene was. Like, it's so crazy. It's like,
I at some point, it took me a long time to read House of the Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which is one of the classic, American Gothic texts. And I remember reading that for the first time, maybe in college or just after college, and going, oh my God, the framework for this story is really, really close to A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I never heard Wes Craven talk about that, but I have no doubt that he read that book.
Yeah.
And I don't think he consciously was going, let me take sort of the framework of House of the Seven Gables and then build this exploitation movie on it. Because I think if he had done that, he would have said it, because it would have made him sound smart. And he didn't have any problem sounding smart. But I just, things like that where you go, yeah, there's something kind of classic in the structure and the storytelling and what he's doing with this. It is, Nightmare on Elm Street is a classic American Gothic
text. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. And I think that he did a really wonderful job of pulling, because you and I have talked about this before. Specifically, when you reviewed Burn the Girls, you caught me off guard. Actually, I was like, I had not considered that influence in my writing. But you asked me, hey, was any of this influenced by Wes Craven and his work with The Nightmare on Elm Street? Because the blurring the lines between reality and dream, or reality and some alternate, plane of experience or whatever. And I was like, You put me back on my heels for a second when I read that email. I said, hold on a second. Joe's right. Like, it just naturally was a part of like something I was wanting to do. But when you made me stop and think about
you're sitting there going, damn, I'm smarter than I thought I was.
Actually, I'm going, well, hold on a damn minute. Did I? I did. I'm like, holy cow, I didn't realize how impactful.
It's baked in. Yeah.
All these years, man.
Sure.
And you pulled some nuance out of that. You were like, because in some parts of the book you're using italics and others you're not. And I'm like, holy crap. Like I just became how much time do you spend writing something, right? Like all that time. And I never connected the dots.
Well, it's good. I mean, it would be really hard, I think, to write a book like that effectively if you were super conscious of that. That's like that like the higher mind, like you were doing some of it subconsciously, and that's better for your writing.
Well, I think a smarter man would have connected the dots.
No, I mean you connect it. Well, no, it doesn't.
I'm just messing with you.
After the fact, you figure it out, and you go, yeah,
damn, Joe,
that is where I was.
I was like,
because I grew up with that stuff, and that's stuff that's important to me, and it's an influence. I mean, the influence is you can't you know, I mean, we've talked about this too, about my sort of struggles to write fiction, and I think that's because I'm overly conscious of
Yeah.
influences and you know, it's like you have to you know, you have to let that stuff be kind of water under the bridge as you're writing. And then let the critic feel like
Yeah.
he's doing something valuable by pointing it out. And you go, yeah, look, yeah, that's good for you.
Well, I had never had someone with that perspective interact with me about the story. And I thought that was
Yeah,
awesome. I was like, well, hold on a second. You really did show me what kind of influence Wes Craven had on my writing all these years later. And I never
yeah,
even considered it. Because if you had asked me who are your literary influences, I probably would have been pulling all the same names out of the hat that most people do. Oh yeah, Stephen King, Peter Straub, obviously Poe, and just start
yeah,
going down the line. Anne Rice, all these things. But it never occurred to me to go Nightmare on Elm Street, and it's
yeah,
absolutely a huge influence on that. And so,
yeah.
I just was like, I've got to
Well,
dive into this book now.
I'm glad you validated it, because there's also the flip side of this coin, which is that, like, 4 or 5 years, so deep focused on Wes Craven's
Mm,
mind and what he was doing, and the why of it. I was like seeing him everywhere. So I mean,
yeah.
it's the same thing. Like when I was doing the T.S. Eliot books, it was like I could connect T.S. Eliot to anything, and and it wasn't that I was trying. It was just I saw
Yeah.
connections everywhere because I was just so deep
You see his
into it.
fingerprints all over the
Yeah,
place.
yeah. But I mean, also, I grew. I mean, you know, I've done the deep dive on Stephen King too. So I
Right.
certainly I think that was in the email too. It's something you brought up, the
Sure.
italics, and I was like, oh, so you're kind of using.
Well, when you said Pet Cemetery, I said yes.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely Pet
Yeah.
Cemetery.
But then
Yeah,
I was like, I mean, you did kind of blow my mind because that was at the same time, roughly, in my life that I was doing all of this. So if I could just I closed my eyes for a second and I went all the way back there.
yeah,
And I thought, what was I sitting in? I was sitting in Pet Cemetery and Nightmare
yeah.
on Elm Street and all these things at the same time. And it all just kind of like packed itself in there and just buried itself in the back of me little mind for, and here I am
Yeah.
now, an old
No,
man.
those are the things you love, and you're right. If you That's like the Ray Bradbury. I remember
Uh,
always just saying, your job as a writer
mm,
is really just to get out there and be really do an honest exploration of the things that you love or the things that really upset you in the world.
right,
And it's like it's as simple as that. You've
right,
got to don't overthink it. That's what you're doing.
right.
You're expressing your love, and you're also going, here's some things I'd like to fix about the world to make a better world.
Right.
I mean, especially with horror fiction, it's like things are not working out the way they should be working out. uh,
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. You've got such a unique experience in writing about and with, Wes's world that you can see where those to repeat myself, like you can see where those fingerprints are now
yeah,
in the world around you. And so many of us, I hope will dive into this book and get that same perspective because it really is like a moment of awareness. It was like I like turned and I tried to talk to my wife about it, but she was like, I'm sorry, what? Because she didn't have the same like upbringing and same
she
experiences.
didn't read the book. She would have read the book.
Yeah, she now has homework to do, right? Yeah. So, but she did point out something. Terrible segue, and I wasn't planning on
Uh-oh. All right, what you got?
the cover art,
Yeah.
which of course I'm a cover art nerd. I mean, anyone who listens to the podcast is like, Marino, stop talking about covers. But like as soon as I saw this, I was like, wow, look at that! Like this could have gone many different ways, right?
Well, yeah,
This is really cool.
yeah, it's Bill Sienkiewicz, who's just like one of the great, illustrators of artists of our age. And he did the cover for Not Bad for a Human uh, years ago. So let's see what we got.
So he was the one who did the Lance Henriksen
Yeah.
bio. Okay.
And yeah, when I was thinking about covers for Wes, it was just like, what's my ideal?
Hmm.
And I just always loved I loved that, he captured something about Lance, the kind of like the brooding intensity. Um, but then, and then there was Alex Lodermeyer, who's the cover designer on both of these books. On the Lance image, sort of put this little flash of color that gives it's almost like a halo around a guy who's in hell,
Right.
and it's just perfect, the kind of the juxtaposition. And I went to Bill with the West. I mean, first I was like, so are you a Wes Craven fan? Because I figured, if you're not, maybe this is not the right thing. But yeah, he was, oh, I love Wes Craven, would love to do this. And I said, he the photos that I love of Wes, um, and it's just kind of how I picture him. I mean, it's like the face. I can like see the expression on his face when I was sitting and talking to him. He would do, you know, he's always being asked these very intense philosophical questions, heavy questions you know, about these dark stories that he's told. We would always kind of get photographed or depicted as a very sort of brooding guy. And, but he was always kind of smirking. And
Yeah, I mean,
and
when
there
you
was
look at the
always,
pictures, he's smirking.
there's always like a little twinkle in his eye. Like he can't, like he knows that's not who he really is. There wasn't into the intensity was real, but he's also like, that's not all, that's not entirely who I am. I'm not just the horror guy. I don't sit around brooding all the time. And he had a really kind of wicked sense of humor, very quick-witted. And so, I said to Bill, like I want the kind of the darkness of the heavy charcoal look, and I want the darkness sort of there in the eyes, but you've got to get, the smirk, and you've got to get, I mean, I didn't even, I'm not an artist, so it's like, I don't know how to tell you, get the light in his eyes, but it was just like, I want that juxtaposition of the dark and the light. So, I mean, this was what he turned in. I think he nailed it. I remember sending to one of the people who was closest to Wes, and she said, yeah, the eyes really draw you in. They're deep. They're like these black holes with these pinpricks of light. She said, that really kind of draws you in. But yeah, the smirk is like signature Wes Craven to me. I mean, it's just like, I mean, I wanted it because it's like, that's how I see Wes. That's the Wes that is in this book with all of its kind of self-contradictions. And, from a marketing standpoint, it's like, well, would it have been better to, I said, I don't want the Freddy Claw. I don't want Ghostface. I don't want any of the kind of the cliche things that are not bad marketing decisions. Probably if I'd been dealing with a manager or an agent or a really big publisher, they would be like, you can't do this cover. You've got to sell Freddy Krueger. This is for people who don't know the name Wes Craven. You've got to put, you've got to have an image. You've got to have Nightmare in the title of their.
Yeah, those people aren't the ones wanting to read this book.
Yeah, there's other books that exist for those people. Go read the other books. It's fine. Yeah. It's fine. They're good books too. I've read them.
I think it's fantastic.
They're great. It's fine.
Yeah, they're nice people.
Yeah, but mine's better. Damn it! I just
So one of the things that I've always I am an idiot for this, but like, obviously Robert Englund stands out in my mind when I think about the Freddy movies. But the first time I actually saw Wes Craven, I was like, he actually kind of resembles or Freddy kind of resembles him a little bit too. I was like, is there something, there in the selection of Robert Englund where he didn't look like Wes Craven, but he does have kind of like, he could be related. Like, could be second cousin. To Wes.
He, the whole look of Freddy was based on this basically like a wino that Wes saw out his bedroom window as a kid, who was kind of like trying to scare him. So there's a whole, so I mean, like the sweater and the fedora. Wow. And kind of a shuffling walk. I mean, like all of it kind of, Freddy was sort of based on that. Robert was not the original choice. I'm trying to remember the actor's name. It was actually, I think when they first were trying to cast Freddy for the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and very early on, there was some talk about trying to get a stuntman, somebody who had a real physical presence and was kind of physically intimidating. And I think that idea went by the wayside pretty quickly. And then it was like Wes or Freddie is an older guy because I think the shuffling wino that had scared Wes as a kid was this, just this old kind of haggard, world weary guy who like the only kicks he's getting left in life from scaring a little kid. And the sadistic nature of that this is just like this creepy old man.
All right.
And so Freddie was supposed to be a creepy old man. And I forget what happened, that maybe the actor became unavailable or something, because they did makeup tests on a completely different actor. And the thing that sold Wes on Robert was just basically his willingness to go there, to kind of be sadistic and be kind of twisted and have fun with being that dark and tormenting people, to be able to not hold back, because you're tormenting, kids basically.
Yeah.
And like most people would be inclined to hold back, even as you're going, well, it's just a performance, but it's like, this is going on screen. Millions of people are going to see this. I'm going to be judged by this. I'm going to be identified with this persona. And so you maybe hold back on how far you're willing to go with that. And, Robert was the guy who didn't hold back. He was willing to go there.
So they had he really saw something special there. Well, he obviously made a good decision.
Yeah, I think it worked out. It worked out okay for both of them.
Yeah, it worked out all right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be a little unfair because I didn't prime you for this question, but you probably get it when you do podcasts. And it's going to be about what you've been reading lately. And if you've got anything to recommend, it doesn't have to be fiction, doesn't have to be nonfiction, doesn't have to be specific to any particular realm, but what do you got there?
The very best of Caitlin R. Kiernan.
Oh, look at that.
Which is fucking brilliant.
Is it?
Yeah.
Nice.
I am late to the party on this. I can't be like, oh, I discovered this great writer because she's been around for 20 years and everybody knows about her except me. But
yeah, I didn't.
Oh my God. It's like, she's stylish, she's intelligent, she's obsessive. It's like everything that I kind of want, but like subtle and ambiguous. I love sort of, I don't know. I don't even know. I just started reading it a couple of days ago, and I was like wide awake at 2 a.m. last night. I'm like, I'm gonna come read some, and it was just sitting there at 2 a.m. going, my God, this shit is brilliant.
Nice.
And so I'm just skimming the surface now. There's a deep dive in my future, probably into her novels.
Excellent.
I'm starting with the short story. So that's I can't talk intelligently about it yet. This is new to me, but but
you're having a good time.
But I'm loving it. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect. I find some of the best recommendations I get about books are actually in the podcast. I'm like, there'll be things I've never would have seen on social media or, heard hyped in some TikTok video or something crazy.
I just heard her name kind of thrown around and I didn't even know. I think there was like some list of horror writers who might kind of qualify for the label of quiet horror, which is something I'm really into lately. And so I was like, all right, let me give this a shot. And it's twisted. Awesome. And there's some like actually pretty subtle T.S. Eliot references in some of these stories too, which is like, all right, well now you're just talking to me, like,
speaking my language.
They're thrown away. I mean, it's like you wouldn't know unless you're me, but yeah.
Unless you wrote a biography on T.S. Eliot.
Yeah, well, she apparently she wrote a novella that's out of print, called The Dry Salvages, which was one of Eliot's most famous poems, as part of his 4 quartets, which to me is his masterpiece. And so I'm gonna have to check that out. But it's like set in outer space, so I don't know what the connection is to Eliot's poem, which is set on the coast of New England, and I don't know what the connection is yet. But I'm fascinated. So that's probably going to be the next several books I read.
Awesome.
At this rate.
Excellent. Well, I think the most appropriate thing to do is to tell people where they can find The Soul of Wes Craven. You guys can get it all the fantastic book retailers. I know your website, which I'll flash up here real quick, specifically for this book, is wescravenbook.com. So you guys go check that out. You can see also there's some pretty cool pictures of Wes on the site. There's a couple little things here. They got a trailer. You've got information about the interviews. It's like an extension of the book. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I have a really cool publisher on this one. This guy, Dustin McNeil, who runs Harker Press. And Dustin is also a writer and a big horror geek and has written quite a few books that are floating around the shelves back here on different horror franchises. I mean, he's written books about the Phantasm series and the Halloween series and Jaws and he's
Chucky.
He knows his stuff. Chucky, yeah. The Rob Zombie Firefly trilogy. Yeah, he's just a cool guy and he's written cool books. And it's like that was, to get published by somebody who is a writer himself and working in the same niche and understands it, and who could look at this book and be like, yeah, this is, let's get this out into the world, because this is the kind of book that I love and that I want to be involved with and that I want to support. So yeah, he created the website and he's out there in front of it in a way that I'm terrible about getting out in front of a book because I'm just terrible at self-promotion. so I'm glad somebody else is doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. It's a fun little site to check out and learn some interesting stuff. There's even a Did You Know page about Wes Craven.
Yeah.
Some fascinating details that are largely unknown by his fans. I think that's really cool.
Like that W.H. Auden connection, I think.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, this is cool stuff, connections to all different types of things. Like if I had read this, I would have known that about the Billy Graham connection before our conversation.
There you go. Do your homework next time.
I know, Marino, get it together. I mean, it's funny because I bought the book from Joe about a week ago, and I said, "Hey, I want to buy your book, but I want a signed paper copy." And he's like, "All right, well, we're going to do this co-authoring thing." And I'm like, "All right." So I held out, and then we get to the event. I buy the book, and I'm like, "Hey, so when do you want to do the podcast interview?" He's like, "Well, can you get the book read in the next 3 days?" I was like,
it's like
as a joke.
As I'm talking to people about the book, though, it's like what I'm really interested in is like, well, what would make you pick this up? Like, what's your interest in Wes? And then if you read the book, it's like, well, what did you not know, or what was it that jumped out? I don't want to listen to myself talk. I mean, I know that's what this is all about.
You're not interviewing me, man.
But it's like I don't have, I want to have a dialogue, and I want to I know what I get tired of listening. It's all in the book. Just go read the book,
Well, yeah, to your credit, I was interested in the book beforehand. When you'd first told me about what the project was, the nature of the book and everything, I was like, wow, all those years of research and interviews and everything, I've got to check this out. But then after sitting with you for a couple of hours and at this event and us talking in more detail, I'm like, really? I'm really excited to get the book. So hopefully we've communicated some of that excitement that I was able to peel from you at the signing into this episode, and people will be just as motivated as I was, because now this is sitting on my end table next to my couch, and I'm having to explain to my children who Wes Craven was.
Wes deserves it. He deserves the deep dive, and he deserves, the attention.
Well, we appreciate that you took the time to do it, because that's a tremendous amount of work. So, and now we get to reap the benefits of Joe's madness.
Right. Go read that book. Make your wife read it too.
Make your wife read it. Don't let her watch any of the movies until she's read it. Actually, it's funny because she was so young, and she did come up in a very strict Baptist house that I was like, oh, you're going to have to watch the movies now. You need to see what was happening on the other side of the coin. So, all right. Well, Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience with this amazing project, with this amazing book, with Wes, with all the people, with our audience. I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. You're always such an absolute pleasure to talk with, and you're such a brilliant, gifted writer, and you've got such an amazing perspective on story and what it means to tell someone else's story. And
Hang on, let me write this down so I can use this as a blurb on.
oh, it'll be recorded. You can just, yeah. That, I mean, it really was, it's a gift to me to be able to sit with you and learn from you. Every single time we talk, I tell you the same thing. Every time we talk, I'm learning from you. And it's not just because, you know, you're doing something I'm not doing, or there's something unique happening that I'm not experiencing. It's more so like you really are so phenomenally gifted at what you're doing, and you have such a wonderfully brilliant way of communicating with your readers and with other people that the more I think people know about you, the more they're drawn to your work. So thank you so much for being open to being on the show and sharing some of your experiences as a writer and a television producer and all the things with us, so that we can understand in a little bit more depth exactly what the perspective is on the soul of Wes Craven. And everyone go out and grab the book. That's the cover one more time if you guys can't remember what it looked like. Links at the bottom here. Go check it out. Go buy all the books. Go see Joe at all the events. And we'll talk to you guys in the next episode.